What is absolutely amazing about pieces of Johann Sebastian Bach, that even pieces that he has composed for his children in order to teach them piano, even these pieces are complete masterpieces. Dramatically very intensive, incredibly profound, and very exciting to play. So let's have a look what kind of gem we deal with. And I would suggest you, I would just quickly demonstrate you this piece, and I would suggest you to close your eyes and listen to the response of your inner self. What kind of image or visualizations or associations or maybe some emotional states you would experience while listening to this piece. And then please share in comments your thoughts and your perceptions. So the first stage of working this piece, and I always suggest to my students to work on pieces in stages in order to make the process very well organized and structured. The first stage would be to understand the harmonic skeleton, because what this piece teaches us is to recognize patterns, to recognize chords behind all these figures, because there are many notes in each bar, yeah, but all of them form just one chord, you see. That's why your first task would be to play the harmonic skeleton and to gather all the chords together. You might skip notes on the third beat in the left hand. These 8 notes, you might skip them for the beginning and play just the bass and the chord. And then I would also suggest you to break the piece into a few sentences, into a few segments, in order to proceed from one segment to another one and not being overwhelmed by the length of the piece. Because if you structure your piece, if you break it into sections and work on one section at a time, then you will master it much faster than trying to swallow an elephant. So the lack of organization in the work, usually it's the most usual obstacle for students. So the first sentence, let's say the first segment, would be 7 bars long, and we play just the harmonic progression. C minor in bars 1, 2, F minor in bars 3, 4, diminished chord in bars 5, 6. And this is something quite typical for the Baroque music. You see that we have a diminished chord here, but still same bass, and this is called a tonic pedal, because C is our tonic, it's our principal tone in C minor, so we are on tonic pedal, yeah. And this is a great way to improvise. For example, just playing one bass in C minor, and then see what kind of chords, which chords might sound well with that. C minor, for example. So this is a great way to improvise a bit and to experiment. And then the next section starts from bar 8. And it's simple because we have same chord in the right hand, but only the bass moves. Bar 8, 9, 10, and then bar 11, 12, we reach this diminished 7th chord, F sharp, A, C, E flat. And this chord is so tense. It's like eating a lemon. Yeah. So it must be resolved, and the most typical way to resolve this chord is to collapse it. So it collapses inside towards G minor. What exactly happens here, but with suspension, and suspension is when we resolve the chord not immediately, not simultaneously, but in parts, kind of, yeah? So here, bar 12, bar 13 suspension, A gets stuck, and only in bar 14 it goes to G. Next bar. Next 3 bars, 15, 16, 17, I would suggest you to learn them separately as a transition point to the next section. So 15, 16, 17. And these chords are absolutely beautiful. Bar 15, E flat major 7th, E flat major major chord that is not really typical for Baroque music. It's very typical for jazz music, for example. This is why jazz players love making transcriptions of on Bach, because the material welcomes such experiments. And Bach was often blamed by church authorities because he was a church organist, as you might know, and he was often blamed and criticized for his rebellion music language, because he was using such sharp experimental harmonies quite often, and his bosses didn't like that, so he was constantly criticized as a rebel, that he confuses people who come to church with his weird harmonies. So, but for our perception, it's absolutely genius. And from bar 18, we start the next section, the next development. This chord is a dominant 7th towards G minor, D, F sharp, A, C, that must be resolved towards G minor. And this is exactly what happens here. Bar 18, bar 19, resolution toward G minor, but still on D, yeah? So now for a while we are going to stay on D. And then bar 20, another, this is just an inversion of D major 7th chord, another resolution towards G major, so we always bounce between D major 7th, G minor, G major 7th, G minor. And in bar 22, finally, D major 7th in its root version. No? And bar 23, we had to resolve towards G minor, actually, but this is what happens. Yeah, very refreshing, I would say. And this is a very important point for our interpretation as well. So we have to keep in mind that bar, because we develop towards that sudden shift. Something breaks here, something changes. Very dramatic chord. And then from bar 24, I would suggest you to start a new section when you learn a new sentence. 24, 25, 26, 27. And what's important is when you play such chord progressions, at first analyzing what kind of chords you have, but then always training also your ear memory. So you have to sing the upper voice in these chords. La, sol, sol, fa, diez. Because that would allow you to perceive this music also horizontally as a melody. So you perceive it vertically, analyzing what kind of chords you have here, trying to remember patterns. But you also remember it horizontally, learning it as a song. You might even play the upper voice separately and sing it, yeah? That will allow you to learn this piece from different sides, activating different memory types, what is very, very important. And from bar 28, we have another section. Diminished 7th chord. In the left hand, you have C sharp, so we have this diminished 7th chord. Next bar, we just move everything except the bass. Move the chord 1 key lower. And bar 30, resolution towards G minor. And you might feel how music becomes narrower and darker. In bar 31, suspension. Bar 32, dominant 7th chord, D major 7th chord. And bar 33, same thing. And then we get to suspension towards G major. And here we have a sensation that these dark clouds, they dissolve, and we finally have a glimpse of sun. Yeah? So this is another very important point for our interpretation. And from bar 35, we start the ending sentence. Now we are always on G, on a pedal, G pedal, but chords, this is just a dominant 7th chord towards G major that comes in bar 37, G major 7th in bar 37, 38 and bar 39. The last time we see C minor chord in bar 39, although the piece is written in C minor actually. So this is our principal key, our tonic, but nevertheless the piece ends in G major in dominant, which is not really typical, which is also quite unique for Baroque music and for classical music in general. And I can't even recall another piece by Bach that would end in dominant key. If you remember some piece that would finish with a dominant chord, let me know please in comments. But in general, that's a rather exception. Yeah, that's why also that's another very interesting thing to consider when you will interpret this piece. And then as soon as you're done with the harmonic skeleton, as soon as you can play the piece like that in chords, we start optimizing motions. What is very important, the right hand to transfer the weight properly, release the fingers that don't work, so don't lift fingers, because then you work with them constantly, and that causes a co-contraction. That is a quite dangerous habit, and in my course dedicated to the basics of technique that you might check out following the link in the description, I explain why and how to form healthy habits as well. So just remember to releasing fingers instead of lifting them, because if you release finger properly, the key will just go up immediately. So you don't need to additionally work lifting your fingers. And of course, stability in the finger, in the nail joint and in the knuckle is very important. And the wrist is nevertheless flexible on the level with the keys, not falling down, not high, but nevertheless flexible. Yeah? And we transfer the weight properly here. So whenever you move somewhere with a finger, your weight, the weight of the hand, transfers to that finger. And in order to make it more efficient and more expressive, because those are very often intertwined things. Yeah, the reason why I pay so much attention to efficiency is not efficiency per se, but because efficiency helps us to play also more interesting and more expressively. And so for that, we have to shape these motifs with the wrist and with the arm movement. So the whole movement is played on one rounded motion. And we have two options here, either downward circle, when your wrist goes down right and then up left, like that. And of course you free up the elbow so it can follow. You don't do anything extra with the elbow, but you allow it to follow your hand. And another option that might be a bit more efficient, although maybe not as expressive, is an opposite thing. When you go in the keyboard for the second finger, starting lower and then going a bit higher and using that upward motion circle. For players who experience fatigue in hands, I would suggest this option because it's a bit healthier, a bit less, has less chances to provoke tension than downward circle. However, if you have strong fingers, strong hands, never experiencing problems, maybe downward circle might also be a good option for you. Left hand, good support on the bass, of course, good stability in the knuckle, cushion in the wrist. 1, 2, and very precisely releasing releasing the hand, releasing the finger on the second beat, because these musical rests, they are as important here as sounds themselves. So the silence in Baroque music has as much importance as sounds. That's why 1, 2. Imagine that you have a spring that is tense and then it releases on the second beat. Ba-yum, pom pom ba-yum, pom pom ba-yum, pom pom ba-wum, pom pom ba. So you should feel a micro explosion. Ba-yum, pom pom ba-wum. Yeah, so that second beat might be very energized. That silence must be very energized. And these 8 notes that you have on the third beat with a good support. So I would not suggest you to play them very sharply, because that might sound a bit too sharp and cause tension. Instead, you reach the bottom and then release. Boom. Cushioning a bit with the wrist. Boom, 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 wham, bim, bim, ba, yum. Boom, boom, ba, yum. So a good contact with the key, always getting in contact, getting in touch with the bed of the key. And these shorter notes in the right hand, you might play with 3, 2, 1. 3, 2, 1. Like that. But also I would suggest you to play them on an elastic, jumpy motion, reaching the bottom of the key, boom, boom, and then gently rebounding, boom, boom, like that. So again, not too sharp, not too sharp and not too short. Yeah, because that would sound not equal and cause tension. So nevertheless, boom, boom. So in general, it's always good to play Bach with grounded hands in a good contact with the bed of the key and avoid sharpness and stress. So always massaging the keyboard. It will always make you sound more mature and more substantially profound in music of Bach and in piano playing in general. And then as soon as you have synchronized these motions, we start planning the strategical development of the piece. And one thing I have to say you, when you have leaps in the left hand, here you have to go high. Here you have to go higher after pressing the last 8 notes and cover that leap from above, covering that bass from above. So here we don't move horizontally, like that, and then releasing the hand in a leap and stabilizing the finger at the moment of the hit. Stable fifth finger, stability in the knuckle is essential here. And then, of course, interpretation. So we might start very energetically from the very start. But then we feel that bars 3 and 4, they are even more, a little bit more intensive. Because we go slightly higher, and then another very intensive chord. And here we might get a bit lower. And then another wave of development toward this chord. Yeah, so we create a smooth crescendo. Opening up the space a bit in bar 15. And this is the end of the section. I would perceive it as the end of the section. However, there might be different opinions. And from bar 18, we start another wave of development. That's why we might suddenly start softer from bar 18. Growing. This is a very important point, of course, bar 23. And then giving up. Darker. Narrower and darker. And then this is a very important spot. I would try to find a special warm color, yeah, because this is like after the storm, we finally see some glimpses of sun through the gray and dark clouds. And then hope arises. The last bar, 43, one before last, might be a bit more, a bit wider, so we might play it slower. And of course, it would be great to separate 16 notes and the last quarter. Separate, and the last chord. It would be a bit closer to the style. And the most important thing, of course, here is a rhythm. So in Bach, we don't think in phrases, making rubato like in romantic music, but we think in pulsations. We have to always keep in mind to always actively feel 2 layers of pulsations. These 16 notes, taka, 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 and 8 notes, pum, 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 pum. So just imagine that these 2 layers, they pulse simultaneously, pum 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 pum, taka 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 taka, pum 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 pum, and you have to actively feel these pulsations in your body, actually, yeah? And that's why the tempo, the stability of rhythmical pulsations is very, very important here and in music of Bach in general. So I hope that you found it helpful. Check out my comprehensive tutorials on Teachable and see you next time.